he's been criticized here, really. This degree of autonomy acceptable. People should be governed. And so Robert Adams, for instance, who teaches at UCLA, introduces a third alternative that he calls the theonomous will. A will that is, a will that is governed by God. Theonomous will. Whether Kant really would allow that or intended it is a very good question. Was the law of God. So it may be a direction that we would have been happy with. In any case, his primary intention in talking of the autonomous will is to come back to the distinction between acting out of a voluntary respect for duty as distinct from simply following inclinations and giving in to extraneous influences. So this is his categorical imperative. He does speak in connection with the respect for persons of what he calls a kingdom of ends. That is to say, if you treat people as ends rather than means, what you're doing is advocating that society should be a kingdom of ends. You know, say a kingdom of people of equal worth, value. This is the basis for his emphasis on human rights. In the light of that, he proposed what he called a League of Nations. That's where Woodrow Wilson got the idea, straight from Immanuel Kant. He has a book, Kant does, a little booklet called Perpetual Peace, in which he proposes this, that rational people, you see, acting out of goodwill, should contract together, a contractual arrangement, contractarian approach. The respect for persons leads to the notion of kingdom of ends. And in his religion book that we'll be getting into, he talks of this kingdom of ends simply as the kingdom of God. You see, he sees this as the biblical notion of the kingdom of God. All right. Any comment, query that far? That's pretty straightforward, I think, once you see what he's up to. David?
I was just wondering, with his categorical standard of the atomic will, he said that was independent of all types of emotions or passions.
Yeah, you see, the only thing that is good without qualification is goodwill. It follows that the only thing that is really morally worthy is an act done out of a sense of duty. Not doing your duty because somebody's standing behind you with an arrest warrant. Not your duty because really you have an unthinking habit, you see. And certainly not avoiding your duty by being lured away by roommates who want to go out on the town for the night. Whatever. No, stick there and read Kant.
But you wouldn't go for, like, for example, a Christian praying to God, God, change my desires so that I would want to do your...
Oh, he'd be very happy if your desires were changed, you see. His point is that acting out of desire is something which is deterministic. Now, let me go on to make that point. What he is arguing here in his analysis of the moral self, okay, and the analysis of the moral experience, what he's arguing is that the will is free when it acts rationally out of a sense of duty, guided by reason out of a sense of duty. On the other hand, if the will, rather than if the individual is not acting out of that kind of goodwill, but is simply doing what it wants to do, it's functioning at the empirical level where the cause-effect mechanisms of mechanistic science come into play. So in simply doing what you want to do, eating without thought of whether this is what you ought to be eating, for instance, responding thoughtlessly and breaking off what's got to be done and just warming it up. What you're doing is acting more like an animal than a rational human being, you see. So he's trying to maintain that if you live at the sensual level, pursuing desires, inclinations, emotions, feelings only, you see, you're not free. You're not acting as a human being. You see. While the desires may not be bad, the activities may not be bad, he's concerned about the moral quality of the person. You see, the only thing that is good without qualification is goodwill. Yeah. Oh, you know, he's been criticized here. Sure, he was a Prussian. I don't know why that would be a criticism, but a lot of English writers talk about the Prussian in him. He was a bachelor. Yeah, you know, the very disciplined bachelor. The neighbors set their clocks in the morning by the time when he walked down the street to the university. That sort of an individual. Underlying it, I think, is the feeling that, and I suspect this underlies your question, David, that there is something less than fully human about the notion of acting out of a sense of duty and ignoring desire. God-given desire. Perhaps redemptively transformed desire. You see. Well, I think the thing to say in his defense is that he recognizes that we have a natural desire for happiness. He recognizes that this is a God-given desire for happiness. The problem is that in this life, those two don't come together. You see. There's too much going against us for them to come together. Both in us and outside us. To automatically trust desires for happiness. And that's what feeds into what you see coming later in terms of the corollaries. Okay. Pete?
Justify saying we can act out of a good.
Yeah, he's not saying we always do. He's very explicit that there are people who will fly in the face of their duty, act to the contrary, reject moral law. He's trying to get into his thinking something of what theology talks about in terms of depravity. Whether he does so sufficiently is the question. His background was Lutheran pietism, and Kierkegaard is quite critical of him in this regard. Not for being a Lutheran pietist, I mean, but for what Kierkegaard regards as a too optimistic view of human nature. Somebody else back there, yeah.
What about when my duties conflict?
Yeah, you see, that question implies that he's simply saying, do your duty. And so what do you do if you have conflicting duties? But he's not just saying, do your duty. He's saying, act out of a sense of duty. So his response to your question would be that in choosing between conflicting duties, you choose out of a sense of duty. You don't do the duty that you prefer to do. You say that you're more inclined to do. It's easier to do. You do the duty which, as a rational being, you decide it is your duty to do. Now, that does get him into some problems. Well, you decide in terms of respect for persons. So that hypothetically he might say that if duty A conflicts with duty B and they're both duties to persons, which is more essential in respecting the person involved. In that way, I suppose he might argue in terms of lifeboat ethics. You know what I mean by lifeboat ethics? Extremities where there are two people who can be lost and only one can be saved. Yeah, he is in the sense, well, yeah, he's often taken to be, in the sense that he does not want to allow moral exceptions to moral rules. In that sense, he's an absolutist about lying, you see. There are no such things as justifiable lies. My initial reaction to your question was to pull out that favorite illustration about what would you do if you were in Amsterdam in 1942 and the Gestapo come knocking at the door looking for the Jewish girl you're hiding in your attic. You see, would you tell a lie? Or what would you do? No, I think, at least according to that reading of Kant, he would say, no, you must never tell a lie. You see. Yeah, precisely. We had a Kant scholar here on campus on one of these visiting philosopher programs a few years ago, Christine Korsgaard, who was then at University of Chicago, who's now at Harvard. And she argued in one of her lectures that Kant was not an absolutist in that sense, that he would reconstruct the picture so that you're not lying. What you're doing is respecting persons and treating those who violate persons in a way that keeps the truth from them. Something of that sort. I think the point is, yeah, you think that's a subtle one, huh? There are 2 or 3 classic ways in which ethicists respond to your kind of